Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This is the final section from Chapter 13, The Great War. This section is called 13.4, A Flawed Peace. So we're going to look in a little bit more depth here about the outcomes of World War I, and in particular the treaties that basically changed the world and changed Europe that resulted from World War I. So in your guided reading, there's a couple of boxes, and each box has kind of like an overall theme or idea at the beginning. And the first box says Wilson's goal of achieving a just peace differed from the peace objectives of France and Britain. So to understand a little bit more about who was involved in this peace process, they're oftentimes called the big three, or three of the largest um, you know, country leaders that were involved in deciding what was going to happen to the world after World War One. And the first person that we're going to talk about is Wilson. There's a picture of Wilson. He's a president of the United States, and he's got some pretty lofty goals going into the peace conference that we're going to talk a little bit more about. You also have Clemenceau. He's the French leader. He's easy to remember because of his big bushy mustache. He's also the leader that is pushing hardest to punish Germany, to place them at fault for the ravages that happened to his country in World War One. And finally, you have George. Lloyd George was the Prime Minister of England. And he was kind of, if you're going to say Clemenceau is pushing hardest for Germany to be punished, and Wilson is pushing hardest to try to build a lasting peace, Lloyd George is kind of in the middle, although he leans a little bit more towards Clemenceau in thinking that Germany should have to pay for all the destruction and all the lives lost by the British Empire during this time period. So those are our three leaders that we're going to look a little more closely at. First question is, what were the guiding principles of Wilson's 14 points? So Wilson made a speech in which he addressed, the ideas he had, called his 14 points, were what the world could do to take steps to create a more peaceful existence with other countries. And one of the major points of his 14 points, we're going to go over a few here, is that he wanted to end secret treaties. He felt like treaties that nations made, that they didn't disclose all the parts of the treaty to the rest of the world. He felt like that was one of the leading causes that led to World War and this destruction in Europe. He also wanted to create freedom of the seas and free trade. And this goes along with reduced national armies and navies, and this is why. Wilson's idea was that with more free trade, with nations depending on each other and trading with each other, and being able to traverse the seas to sail wherever they want, or steam power wherever they want, that was necessary for countries to be able to keep lasting peace. The more we trade, the more we can move about in trade, the less likely we're going to be to go to war with each other because we depend on each other's materials or products. So that's why that kind of gets lumped together there with reduced national armies and navies, because all of these things Wilson felt would create a longer lasting peace. Also remember, from the American perspective, German unrestricted submarine warfare on American ships was a major cause of America getting involved, of the United States wanting to fight in World War I. And so that's another point of having freedom of the seas as one of his 14 points. Wilson was also a big champion of self-determination. And this meant that the people could choose who their leader was, but more importantly, the people could choose which country they belonged to. So if you remember when we talked about the causes with the Serbs that were living in the Austrian Empire, and how some of them wanted to be separate, to be part of Serbia, or other countries ruled over different ethnic groups, and not all of them were always happy to be ruled by that ethnic group. So self-determination was one of his points as well. And then finally, Wilson also wanted to establish a world peace organization. We're going to get into that a little bit later in this video. Here's a picture of Wilson. This is a political cartoon, and his idea for that world peace organization was known as the League of Nations. And you can see here Wilson bending down to give this dove, which is a symbol of peace, this League of Nations branch to carry, but you can see from the size of the branch and the size of the dove that that's not going to be an easy task, and that's actually the point of this cartoon, to point out that the League of Nations is not an easy task in terms of keeping peace around the world. Question number 2 says, what were the concerns and aims of France and Britain? So previously we were just kind of looking at the concerns and aims of the United States, but here's what France and Britain had to say. First of all, their initial, most important concern is national security. After Germany invaded Belgium and France and England came to fight against Germany, they really see this as German aggression and a threat to their own country, a threat to their national security. So that's the primary concern they have at the conference. They also want to strip Germany of its war-making power. Again, blaming Germany for this. They think if Germany hadn't invaded Belgium, this war would have never occurred. And to a certain extent, they might be right, but war may have occurred in other places on another scale nevertheless. But in their viewpoint, it's Germany's fault. So if Germany can't make war, if we lower its army and lower its navy and make strict rules about where their army can and can't go, Germany won't be a threat to us anymore. And then finally, France and Britain want to punish Germany. They feel like Germany deserves the blame for the war and that they should be the ones that have to be punished. And this wasn't that foreign of an idea back then. Like, you had lots of different wars happening up to this point where the loser is punished, has to give up some kind of payment, has to give up some kind of land. This really wasn't that much of a strange or outrageous idea at this time period. So after a lot of heated debate, you have some sort of a compromise between some of the major players. Again, you can see in that picture Clemenceau with his mustache, Wilson there just to the right side of Clemenceau, and then Lloyd George is putting his hat on in the background. And you also have a painting from the Treaty of Versailles in which, remember, the Treaty of Versailles is done in the Palace of Versailles, and that's actually the Hall of Mirrors. In that painting, you can see, if you look closely, you can pick out Clemenceau's mustache, and you might be able to pick out Wilson and George on either side of him. And the person there signing is a representative for Germany agreeing, or signing their name at least, to this peace treaty. So in what ways did the Treaty of Versailles punish Germany? Well, first of all, Germany lost substantial territory. And the best illustration of this is the map you can see on this page. Germany lost territory to quite a few countries, including France, which is in the southwest corner of that area, Alsace-Lorraine, that France wanted. They got it back. But you can see from the top, they lost territory to Denmark. They lost territory to Poland. They lost territory to Czechoslovakia. Quite a few different areas, to Belgium even. Germany also lost all its overseas colonies. So not only did they lose territory within their European state, they also lost their colonies. They also had severe military restrictions. They couldn't have a large army, and they couldn't have the army in all areas, particularly along the border with France. It was outlawed for Germany to place their military there. Probably the worst psychological punishment from this treaty was what was called the war guilt clause. And in this part of the treaty, Germany was forced to sign. They were forced to admit that it was their fault that World War I got going. And that was there for a reason. The basis for Germany to have to pay reparations to the Allies was that they admitted their guilt. Remember, reparations are when a country has to pay another country back for damages from a war. And so Germany had to pay a huge amount of reparations to France, to Belgium, and to England as punishment for them admitting that they had started the war, that the war was their fault, that they had war guilt. So you can see from this list, and this isn't everything, but just from this list you can see that these are pretty harsh punishments. Like I said before, that some of these punishments were things that happened in the past, but the scale to which Germany is having to lose land, admit their wrongdoing, pay reparations, and the restrictions fate put on their military, that's something new. All these things combined are a huge punishment to Germany, and it's actually going to cripple Germany for quite a while. It's not going to be able to rebuild from the war. It takes quite a long time because of all these punishments. How did the treaty change the world map? Well, a couple ways. First, there are new countries created from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. This map does a great job of illustrating it. You can see that empire basically got carved up, traded, and given to other countries. New countries are created. You can see a large chunk went to Romania, a large chunk went to Poland. Austria and Hungary are now separate countries. Czechoslovakia is created. Some went to Italy. And so the Austrian Empire is no more. It has disintegrated since World War I. Ottoman Empire also was carved up. The Ottoman Empire, and we'll look at a map in a second, basically was taken down to just what it is today in terms it is Turkey. The Ottoman Empire ruled over a lot of Middle Eastern countries at this time period, and no longer, they became mandates. They became areas that were kind of given to the victors of World War I to look over, to watch over, and you'll see there were some complaints about that as well. Also, Finland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, they all become independent countries. They had been part of the Russian Empire, and remember, Russia resigned from the war, signed the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, and gave up a lot of land, and some of those lands became their own country as per the 14 points, the point specifically about self-determination. These places are allowed to become their own country. And then again, Poland is brought back. Poland used to be a country, but wasn't at the start of World War I. Poland's brought back with territory from Germany and from Russia. Romania gains a chunk of territory from Russia as well. Romania becomes a lot bigger. And if we look a little bit closer at this map, this does a really good job of showing us what things were before and then what they were after. You can see what Germany was and how it lost bits and pieces on all corners of its empire, what Austria-Hungary used to be, carved up into lots of different countries, and then that whole western sliver of the Soviet Union, that's all independent countries or become parts of other countries. And Russia, or the Soviet Union in particular, as well as Germany, were not happy at all about losing this much land and kind of being subordinate to the victorious powers from World War I. Those are things that are going to come up again for World War II. What was Wilson's 14-point? How was Wilson's 14-point incorporated into the treaty? Well, the 14th point was kind of important. That's the creation of the League of Nations. Wilson wants an international association whose goal is to keep peace among nations. And so part of the treaty that all these people signed was to be part of this League of Nations. This is kind of like the precursor or the 1.0 of the United Nations that we still have today. The idea was if people can come together as a group, talk about their problems, talk about their disputes, they'll be much less likely to have to fight a war over their problems. There'll be other people that can help solve the problems. There'll be other countries that kind of chip in and take sides, maybe, but also work towards a compromise and a peace. The legacy of Versailles was one of bitterness and loss. Here you have the actual copy of the treaty, but to the right you have a demonstration at the German Reichstag, their government building, against the treaty. The Germans felt in a lot of ways that they were forced to sign this. They weren't part of the negotiations, and when they showed up, they had very strong punishments that a lot of Germans in the coming years would turn against and say that they were forced to sign. Why did the United States reject the treaty? Well, a couple of reasons. Many Americans objected to the League of Nations. They weren't in favor of America, the United States, being stuck in negotiations with other countries. They felt like it was going to drag them into another war. They wanted to be independent. They wanted to be separate from the rest of the world. And so that's one reason they opposed it. They also wanted to stay out of European affairs. They felt like a lot of Americans were against the war for most of the time. When America finally joined the war, a lot of people still resisted. And this was kind of like a chance to say, we're not going to get involved in a war like this again. So we're going to stay out of European affairs. That explosively backfired in the future. And number 7, how did the rejection affect the League of Nations? Well, the U.S. rejecting the League of